Hi everyone. I apologize for this being a two-parter. I had a little tech issue, but I'm going to leave off where I ended at the first part of this now two-part video. And I was just about to talk about the final step, the third step of the three-step model, which is analysis. So this shouldn't take very long, but the final step, like I said, is analysis, and I call this holistic analysis, not to confuse it with the analysis of that happens in the second part, the second step in evidence analysis. So what I write here is that this should constitute the bulk of your paragraphs and consist of tying ideas and careful analytical thought back to step one, right? So your argument for the overall paragraph. So analysis should wrap up paragraphs and remind readers that your argument is not only sound but also important, and reinforce the why behind your argument. And that why is the most important aspect to argumentation. And that the why is kind of like when your readers are reading, you don't want your readers to read and then at the end go, okay, well, why is this, not only why is this an argument, but I'm not following, or why is this important, or why anything, right? You want that why question to be answered. So that's work that the writer has to do. And the holistic analysis, so even if you do that peppering of evidence throughout your paragraph, where you're doing, a little bit of brief evidence and analysis and evidence analysis, after all of that, you should have a decent chunk of holistic analysis where you then kind of take all that and do some um, overall analysis of what all of this actually means. Like, what are the major takeaways, reminding the reader of how all of this is connected to, and that's also what we call synthesis. So it's a little bit of analysis. It can operate as synthesis in some cases. Synthesis is where you're now tying everything together. Um, but reminding the reader how all of this is in fact important to driving home a point or multiple points that help develop an idea either in a single paragraph or in an essay, reinforcing the point of that argument as well as reinforcing the purpose and argument of the overall thesis of that essay. So it's kind of like putting a bow, an analytical bow on the end of your paragraph, and you want to have those again pointing back to the thesis or the mini thesis statement, that topic sentence in step one. And a nice thing that we like to have in body paragraphs, or just individual paragraphs on their own, as well as around entire essays, are what's called framing. And analysis, this type of holistic analysis that happens in the third step, um, is where you have a chance to do framing. And framing is what happens when you use specific language or repeat specific ideas that specifically and explicitly refer back to something that you discussed earlier in the paragraph. And this has partly to do with the short-term memory of not just the reader, but just of humans. So if you think about how we read, a reader's going to be reading, but they might not necessarily remember everything that they've read, which is partly why I call it the dumb reader. And also why partly you need to be doing this kind of constant, like, And there's this, and then I'm going to remind you why, and then this is important for my argument because of these reasons. This is how this demonstrates this, and then there's this, and then there's this, right? So there's that emphasis of like I'm constantly having to tell you these things. Remember, remember, remember. This is why this is important, and this is why this is helping to develop and demonstrate that my argument is sound. So there's partly a reason for that, not just, I mean, part of that is to develop and support your argument. Um, but there's also this concept of the short-term memory, and framing is a great way to jog the reader's memory and be like, if you use explicit language, especially if you didn't use that language, if you use it at the beginning, like maybe in your topic sentence or the second sentence or even third sentence, and you didn't use it again throughout the rest of your paragraph, and then you bring it up toward the end of your paragraph, and you use it again, very specific, like I said, specific, explicit phrasing or wording, that creates what we call framing, and that'll jog the reader's memory in theory and will be like, oh yeah, I remember that from the beginning of this paragraph. And that's really cool. And whenever I experience that in student writing, I get so excited. Really when I experience it in any writing, not just student writing. And that's because it's just evidence of really good writing and rewriting at work. It's something that I don't feel happen. Maybe it can luckily happen on a first draft, but I feel like it takes real thought and craft and drafting, like you're going back and really thinking about how you want that paragraph to end and thinking about how you can recall to something previous that's really helpful for your reader. So you're really thinking about your reader at that point, which is a sign of a really careful writer, is because you're thinking more about the reader than you are. Well, I should say if you're thinking about the reader, you're thinking about yourself as a writer, because that's what writers should be doing, is thinking about their readers. So but that's what holistic analysis is, or just the third step of the model is after you've stated, you've done you've offered your argument at the beginning, you've gone through that development of the claim and the argument by providing evidence, making sure it's integrated well, making sure you're justifying why it's there, doing sufficient analysis to help the reader understand and connect the dots for the reader, why it is in fact there and why it is in fact helping to support your argument on however many levels it might be helping to support your argument. You then go into this other type of analysis, which, and like I said, sometimes it's synthesis, depending on how much evidence you're actually using in your paragraph. Of, all right, now let me do this kind of full-bodied, holistic analysis of how all this evidence is working. How it's laboring and in service of my argument. And if your analysis, and I say at the beginning here, it should constitute the bulk of your paragraph, and it really should, even if you're doing a lot of offering, 2 or 3 or even 4 brief quotations, you should still have some, a decent amount of the third step in your paragraph at the end. It should be several sentences and decent sentences. If you're leaving your analysis to 1 sentence, 2 sentences, 3 sentences, even 4 sentences, 4 sentences is maybe but 3 sentences or less is just, it's very underdeveloped and insufficient. So you really want to be careful about how much analysis you're doing and making sure that it's sufficient and not leaving the important work of analysis to that short of a space. And that's what we call like, we want to economize our space, but you also want to make sure that you're doing due diligence to spaces where you should be giving due diligence in your writing. So that's all I have for now in terms of just kind of breaking down as much as not as much as possible, but I could do it longer, but that's already been quite lengthy, and now in a 2-part video session on this standard research paper formula for body paragraphs, for the first step, the second step, and the third step. So hopefully this has been helpful in some way, but otherwise, that's all I've got. Thank you.